I never thought I'd be the kind of person to have a stalker. I'd heard the stories before, read articles about women and men alike who had been shadowed by strangers, but it was always something that happened to other people, people who had made enemies or lived public lives. I was just an ordinary person, a nobody. The first time I noticed anything strange was in early spring. I worked late, and that night, I'd left the office around midnight. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that gets under your skin and makes you wish for the comforting hum of traffic or the babble of voices. I'd parked a few blocks away, under a dim street light. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. You know the feeling, a tingle up the spine, the hair on the back of your neck standing up. But when I turned, the street was empty. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was just winding itself up because it was late and dark and I was alone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, watching. The feeling didn't go away, though. It started happening more often. Little things at first. I'd see a shadow across the street, maybe a figure standing just a little too far away to make out clearly. At first I thought it was a coincidence, that maybe it was just the same person walking home from work like I was. But one night, as I turned onto my street, I saw him. A man, standing beneath a street lamp at the end of my block, his face shadowed by a hood. He didn't move, didn't even seem to be looking at me. He just stood there, his shoulders hunched, his head slightly tilted like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I sped up, practically sprinting to my front door, fumbling with my keys. When I finally glanced back, he was gone. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it was just some random person out on a late-night walk, but I couldn't convince myself. I started taking different routes home, varying my schedule, trying to avoid walking alone in the dark. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of my figure across the street, a shadow slipping between cars, someone watching from the corner. And then things started showing up at my apartment. It was little things at first. A piece of paper slipped under my door with a strange symbol drawn on it. A small doll left on my doorstep, its head twisted at an unnatural angle. At first I thought it was some prank, maybe even kids in the neighborhood. But the messages kept coming, and each one felt more personal, more invasive. One day I came home to find a single photograph slipped under my door. It was a picture of me. I was sitting at my favorite coffee shop, the one I went to every Saturday morning. The photo was close enough that you could see the faint freckles on my nose, the little scar above my eyebrow. The angle was just right, like he'd been sitting only a few feet away. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence, maybe even an overzealous admirer. But I couldn't deny the unease creeping up my spine, couldn't ignore the way I'd started glancing over my shoulder everywhere I went. It was a couple of weeks later that things escalated. I came home late again after working overtime, exhausted and half asleep. I pushed open my apartment door, and something felt wrong. The air inside was heavy, like someone had been in there, like something was waiting. I flicked on the light and saw a single red rose lying on my kitchen table, fresh, with tiny drops of dew still clinging to its petals. My stomach twisted as I realized the implications. Someone had been in my apartment. My sanctuary, my safe space. I felt violated, vulnerable. I checked the windows, the locks, everything I could think of, but there was no sign of a break-in. I called the police, and they sent an officer to take a report. He looked bored, unconvinced. He told me it was probably someone playing a prank, that maybe I'd left a door unlocked by accident. But I knew I hadn't. I could feel it in my gut. After that night, the messages became more direct, more terrifying. A note appeared under my door one morning, scribbled in messy handwriting. "I'm always closer than you think." The next day I found another photo, this one taken through my living room window. It showed me sitting on the couch reading a book. The realization that he'd been so close, just on the other side of the glass, made me feel sick. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, locking every door and window. I even taped up some of the windows, desperate for some sense of privacy. But no matter what I did, the feeling of being watched, of being followed, never left. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching at my front door. I lay there frozen, clutching the knife in my hand, trying to convince myself that it was just an animal. But the scratching persisted, a slow, deliberate sound that seemed to echo through the apartment. When I couldn't stand it anymore, I crept to the door, peering through the peephole. My heart nearly stomped. He was there, standing right outside my door. His face was partially obscured by his hood, but I could see his eyes, dark, intense, filled with something that sent a chill straight to my bones. He was staring directly into the peephole, as if he knew I was watching him. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. I clutched my phone, dialing 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. The operator answered, and I whispered, trying not to make a sound as I told her that there was a man outside my door, that he was watching me. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they did, he was gone. They searched the area, looked for footprints, fingerprints, anything that could prove he'd been there. But there was nothing. No evidence, no sign that he'd been there at all. After that, I didn't feel safe in my apartment. I started staying with friends, sleeping on couches, doing anything I could to avoid going back. But the messages followed me. One morning, I found a note slipped into my bag, even though I could have sworn I had left it unattended. I miss seeing you, come home. I felt trapped, helpless, like no matter where I went, he would always find me. I changed my number, deleted all my social media, even considered moving to another city. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Somehow, he'd always know where I was. The final straw came a week later. I was staying at my friend Sarah's house, trying to put the whole nightmare out of my mind. But as I lay there in the dark, I heard it again, the scratching. This time, it was coming from the window next to my bed. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, as the sound grew louder, more insistent. Finally, I forced myself to look, peeking through a tiny gap in the curtains. He was there, his face inches from the glass, grinning in the dim light, his eyes wide with a sick, unhinged excitement. He mouthed something, his lips forming words I couldn't hear, but I knew exactly what he was saying. Found you. I don't remember grabbing my things, don't remember calling Sarah, don't even remember running out of the house. All I remember is the grin, those eyes, the certainty that he would never stop, never leave me alone. Now, I'm on the move constantly, never staying in one place too long. I keep a burner phone, avoid social media, try to blend into the background. But I can feel him, even now, lurking just out of sight, watching, waiting. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear it, that soft, familiar scratching, always closer than I think.